Hello and welcome to Curator's Perspective, Antwerp to Amsterdam, hosted by the National Museum of Women in the Arts. I'm Gabby Awuma, the Senior Membership Manager at NIMWA. Thank you for joining us for this special virtual presentation featuring Senior Curator Virginia, or as we know her as, Jenny Treanor. Tonight you'll hear from Jenny as she discusses the exhibition Women Artists from Antwerp to Amsterdam, 1600 to 1750. Women Artists from Antwerp to Amsterdam, 1600 to 1750 is organized in partnership with the Museum of Fine Arts in Ghent, Belgium. This exhibition is made possible by Denise Littlefield-Sobel, with leadership gifts provided by Morgan Stanley and Tara Redman. Additional funding is provided by Martha Lynn DePel and Daniel L. Korengold, Lugano, K. Woodward Olson, Patty and George White, Laurel and John Rafter, and an anonymous donor. I'd like to give a big thank you to all of our exhibition sponsors listed on the screen, many of whom stepped up to help support the exhibition when we lost a significant portion of our funding from the National Endowment for Humanities. I would also want to give a special thank you to everyone in attendance tonight. Without you, our work to champion women artists would not be possible. With your support, we have been able to welcome over 1,000 furloughed federal employees and their families and serve our communities as the museum to see women in the arts. So thank you so much for your support of NIMWA. Before we begin, I encourage you to use the Q&A feature to share your questions with our speaker. We'll do our best to answer as many questions as possible before the event concludes at 7. Now, it's my pleasure to turn this program over to Jenny.
Thank you, Gabby. I appreciate the introduction. Welcome, everybody. I'm really excited to speak to you tonight about this project that has been a long time in the making. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can jump right into it. A quick word about the Q&A. Like Gabby said, feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A. I am terrible at looking at that while I'm presenting, so don't get angry at me if I don't get to your question at the end. I'll do my best, but it's too much for my brain to handle when I'm presenting, to try to keep an eye on it. But we will leave some time at the end. Hopefully we can address many of them. So my name is Jenny Treanor. I'm the Senior Curator at the National Museum of Women in the Arts and the co-curator of Women Artists from Antwerp to Amsterdam, 1600 to 1750, which I realize is a very long title, but it's descriptive. You know what you're going to get. And because we partnered with the Museum of Fine Arts in Ghent, we needed a title that was going to work both in English and Dutch. Not as easy as you might think. So my co-curator, Frederica van Dam from Ghent, and I kind of landed on this very descriptive title. We kind of went around about, the Low Countries, Belgium, the Netherlands, and nothing really seemed quite right. So we decided to focus in on the cities, which is where the bulk of these artists that are featured in the exhibition are from. So before I get started, I just wanted to tell you a little bit about how this exhibition came to be. I did a small version of this exhibition. Well, it was really a different exhibition. Now I'm having trouble switching my slides. We did a run through. Everything was fine. I'm not sure what the issue is. There we go. Okay. In 2019, just before COVID struck, I did a small version of an exhibition like the present one called Women Artists of the Golden Age. And you see some installation shots of it here. If you are familiar with the museum, it's in the main floor gallery, which is a very intimate gallery. It's really just one room. And my idea for this exhibition, quite selfishly, was just to put everything that we had by artists from this time period up on the walls, because that's what my my PhD is in 17th century Dutch and Flemish art. And as I was doing this, I realized, that we had quite a substantial collection of art by women from this region, from this period. And to my knowledge, I think the largest collection, museum collection in the United States of works by women from this period. And I also realized that an exhibition, kind of a survey exhibition of women artists in this period, hadn't been done before. So I thought this could be a much bigger project. So starting in 2020, we all were at home and we had a lot of time on our hands with COVID. And so that's really where the real work began of putting this larger exhibition together, trying to find an exhibition partner, which was really important for me to have an exhibition, a museum partner, either in the Netherlands or in Belgium, because this is their cultural history, but also kind of selfishly because I knew I was going to need a lot of loans. And so I thought it would be really helpful to have a European partner. And MSK in Ghent has been a fantastic partner in all regards. We published a catalog together. We did the themes together, the checklist together, and it was really just an amazing experience all around. A little bit about how I came to this subject matter. As an American, my family actually moved to the Netherlands in 1994 and lived there until 2009, 2010. So the Netherlands and The Hague in particular really became my home away from home. And they moved when I started university. And so it really dovetailed with my interest in art history, and then being exposed to the art and culture of this fantastic region. So this brings us to this exhibition that is finally up on the walls. The catalog is published, and I am just relieved and happy and proud and excited and all of the things. This is an exhibition, as the title tells you, is looking at women artists who lived in and around Antwerp and Amsterdam from the years about 1600 to 1750. Those are just, everyone's like, what happened in 1750? Nothing happened in 1750. I just needed an end date. I just wanted to encompass what formerly was called the Golden Age, particularly in the Netherlands, but I wanted to extend it into the early 18th century to include a few other artists that we had in our collection. So what we're talking about are the regions of the present-day Netherlands, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, of which Holland is one province, and then the northern part of Belgium, the region known as Flanders. And so these areas are connected by history and culture and language. During the time that we're talking about, there was a lot of movement between the two, particularly with artists. However, they were separated by politics and by religion. So the Dutch Republic, what's today the Netherlands, was predominantly Protestant, and Flanders and southern Netherlands remained under Habsburg control and was predominantly Catholic. So just to kind of give you the groundwork there. Okay, so the exhibition itself is divided into 4 themes. And the themes are those that you see here: presence, choices, networks, and legacy. So what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to kind of walk you through these themes and highlight a couple of objects. Now, this is a large exhibition. There are about 140 objects total in the exhibition. I'm not going to talk about everyone. I don't even talk about every single one when I'm in the galleries. It's impossible. But I really want you this evening, if you haven't seen the exhibition in person, to come away with a real understanding of how the exhibition is organized and kind of the main ideas. So with that, I would like to show you some installation views of the gallery at the National Museum of Women in the Arts, where the exhibition is currently installed. And you'll notice that the wall here is colored teal, and that's the color that I had on the presents category on the slide before. So each of the themes is kind of color coded because I wanted people to know when they were entering into a new theme. So this is the gallery into which most people enter the exhibition. Just to the right here, if you can see my cursor, this is our elevator lobby. So most people come in through here. There is an entrance on the other side too, so it's kind of a big circle. But I always think of this as kind of the front gallery. And it was really my intention, really from the get-go and thinking about this exhibition, to have people walk in and be surrounded by the faces of women. So we have self-portraits by women artists, we have portraits of women artists by other artists, we have images of them published in contemporary sources. So I really wanted it to be a visual impact. So even if someone shockingly didn't read any of the wall text that I wrote, they would know visually, like, oh, there were a lot of women artists at this time, more than maybe the one that I knew about or the two that I knew about. So just to give you a glimpse, I know it's a little bit hard to see here. So this is a self-portrait of Judith Leister that I'll talk about in a moment. Then there's a portrait here of the still life painter Maria van Oosterwijk. And then this painting on the right of the title wall is a still life, but there is in fact a hidden self-portrait in it. And I'm so sorry that I don't have a great image of it because it's really, really hard to see in reproductions. But the artist Maria van Oosterwijk has painted her reflection in the glass vase in the work, and that's, I believe, her only known self-portrait. So this idea of presence was important to communicate to visitors because I think that there can be a misconception about historical women artists that there weren't that many of them, that maybe there were like one or two. Maybe you've heard of Artemisia Gentileschi. Maybe you've heard of Judith Leister. And the reality is that there were many women artists, and this is true of every time period throughout history. There have always been women artists. If you think about the cave paintings at Lascaux or Altamira, you know, there's no definitive way to prove it, but I'm sure many of those painters were also women. So women artists have been around forever. And it's really just a matter of looking. There was a point in time when I was working on this exhibition where I would come across another name of a woman artist working either in Flanders or in the Dutch Republic during this time that I had never come across before, I'd never heard of before. So this section of presence is really about making the case that, you know, there are more than one or two women artists. There were quite a few of them. And not only that, but many of them were very well known during their lifetimes and very well respected, and for all intents and purposes, very successful with what they were doing. So on the screen here, I have two painters. One is Judith Leister on the left, and that is her self-portrait of around 1630. This is usually hanging in the National Gallery of Art here in Washington, who very kindly lent it for this exhibition. And then on the right is a portrait of the still life painter Maria van Oosterwijk that is on loan from the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and in fact was hanging in their Hall of Honor for quite a long time to kind of, you know, reposition Maria van Oosterwijk as one of the greats of Dutch painting, which she certainly was. Along with self-portraits and portraits of, we also have contemporary accounts of women artists. And I'm showing you here engraved portraits. So from left to right, Maria Sibylla Marion, Anna Maria von Scherman, and Johanna Curtin. And these are all taken from Arnold Houbraken was an artist biographer in the early 18th century in the Netherlands. And he titled his work, The Great Theater of Painters. Interestingly, in the Dutch, in the original Dutch title, he's using the masculine and the feminine form of painters. So I guess in English we would say painteresses, which sounds weird. But so right from the start, he's announcing in his title that he's going to talk about men and women. Now, he talks about 24 women artists altogether, which is a fraction of the, I think, 500 artists that he profiled, but still, it's way better than preceding authors had done. And he includes portraits of many of them, like the one you see here. And one thing I always like to point out, just because I think it's funny, is that in the middle image you see, Anna Maria von Sherman is seen there at the upper right-hand corner. Here she is, right here. And then the two male artists are down here, so she's up above them. And this guy might look familiar to some of you. That's actually Rembrandt van Rijn. So not only is she on the same page with Rembrandt, but she's actually higher on the page than him, which I kind of love. So again, to really reinforce this idea for visitors to the exhibition that there were multiple women artists, many of them were well known. Houbraken's works were published and read widely. A lot of these women were praised for their ability, for their talent. So I want people to realize this, and then as they go through the exhibition, kind of start questioning, well, if so many of these women were so well known during their lifetimes, why don't we know about them today? How come I've heard of Rembrandt van Rijn, but I haven't heard of Anna Maria von Sherman? And there's a point in the exhibition where I try to tease that out a little bit more. The theme of presence continues into the next gallery, and here are a few installation shots. And this little niche, kind of a niche area, is meant to attest to the presence of women artists in multiple materials. So not just painting, but sculpture, printmaking, and then also different subject matter, religious, landscape, still life. Again, just to impress upon the visitor that women are working in all different kinds of materials and subject matter. The work on the left, the image on the left shows a sculpture by Maria Federba, who lived and worked in the city of Mechelen, which today is in Belgium. This is a little misleading, this picture, because the sculpture looks really big. It's not. It's very tiny. It's only about, I guess it's about that big. And then the painting in the background, which I'm sorry is a little out of focus. It's a gorgeous painting on loan from the Cincinnati Museum of Art. That's by Maria von Oostenrijk, who we were just talking about. And then on the right, we have works by Marie Sibylle Marion, who we just saw pictured in Houbraken's print portrait of her. There's this green plover bird that she illustrated hanging on the wall. And then in the case is a volume of her study on the metamorphosis of caterpillars. And I'll talk a little bit more about her in a while. But just to give you some more examples, oh, here's a better image of that Maria von Oostenrijk painting. So floral still lives have become really synonymous with women artists, for better or for worse. In this period, there were certainly many, many male still life painters as well. And in fact, Maria von Oostenrijk she apprenticed with one of the best in Amsterdam at the time, Willem van Alst. So I kind of wanted to take this idea that like, oh, a lot of women artists did floral still lives. Yes, this is true. But in this section of presence, I wanted to show that they're doing this, but they're also doing a lot of other things. The cabinet on the left is, and I'm sorry, I don't have a great install picture of it. It's meant to go on a tabletop. And it's probably about maybe 2.5 feet high by 3 feet wide. So it's pretty substantial. This is a cabinet that was built around 1600, was owned by a wealthy family. And then later in the century, around mid-century, even a little bit later, actually, they commissioned the artist Susanna van Steenwijk Haspel to paint it. So she didn't make the cabinet herself, it was already extant, but she decorated it. And I wanted to include it in this section because this object includes one, two, three, four different genres of painting in this one object. So you can see a little bit that when all these drawers are closed, there's kind of this floral still life going on, this floral element. This door, it's kind of a hinged door that opens to reveal the interior. Susanna van Steenwijk painted an image of Christ and the Samaritan woman on the inside. In a landscape, there's actually a little bit of a cityscape going on back here too. And then again, sorry, I don't have great pictures of this. There are all these smaller drawers up here. In each of the smaller drawers, she's painted portraits of Protestant reformers. And in the exhibition, we have it open to John Calvin. And then in the bottom drawer is an image of it's an architectural painting of the interior of a church. And she was married to the artist Hendrik van Steenwijk, who specialized in this type of architectural interior. And she probably trained with him and learned from him. But I love that in this one object we have, I mean, she's really kind of showing off, right? Just like I can do portraits and I can do flowers and I can do architectural interiors and I can also do biblical subjects. So it's kind of a great way to showcase, some artists specialize very specifically, like Marie van Oosterwijk in floral still lifes, and some artists really did it all. And then on the far right, we have another teeny tiny sculpture. This one's even smaller, probably about this big, by Maria Federba, who did the Crucified Christ that we just saw. She's a really interesting artist, and we have an essay by a scholar who's done a lot of work on her in the catalog. She was not from a family of sculptors, but she and her brothers all became sculptors, and they opened their own workshop in Mechelen. And I know it's very hard to see here. I should have included a detail, but around the bottom, she has carved her name. She signed it, Maria Federba me fecit, in Latin. And that translates to Maria Federba made me. And what is so astonishing about this is that not only is it this very kind of forceful declaration of authorship, but sculptors, male or female, weren't really signing their works, at least in and around the Mechelen area at this point. So it really speaks to her, not only her pride in her work, I think, but kind of her name recognition too, that she would sign her works. So again, just to give a little taste of all the different subject matters and materials that women were working in at this time. So the next section, the second section, is choices. And here you have an installation overview of one of the choices galleries. Notice the color has changed, so it's color coded to different to indicate, to signal to the visitor that they're in another section. So each section has this wall text here that kind of lays out the theme, and then the individual object labels go a little bit into more detail. I want you to remember this painting, just the scale of it for right now. So here's the bench for people to sit on. Here's the painting. It's enormous. And I just want you to keep that in mind because I'm going to talk about it in a little bit. So choices is a theme that allows us to explore what choices were available to which women during this time period. And by considering this, we get a lot more nuance in terms of who is doing what. So you see here on the screen a print on the left by the woman artist Gertrude Rachman, called A Young Woman. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong title. Oh my gosh. It's not a young woman ruffling. That's another image. This is two young women sewing. And then on the right is this really wonderful painting. We don't know who painted it. 17th century. It's from the collection of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. The print is on loan from the Met, of a young girl, nicely dressed, who is drawing. So she is actively engaged in kind of the first step of artistic training, which is drawing figures. And if you look very closely, you can see, I think it's actually nude that she's drawing, but she probably would be looking at a plaster model of a sculpture or a print, maybe. And you can see on the table, she's got some other loose sheets of drawing as well. And there's a lute in the background too, just, art and the learning of art and music sometimes go hand in hand. But this is a great visual document from the 17th century because, again, it is communicating to us that, not only could young girls and women be trained in the art of drawing and painting, but many of them were. The distinction here is that if a woman was not born into an artistic family, which many of them were, as were many men, I will point out, because at this point in time, that was kind of like the family business. Like if you were, if your father was a painter and you were born in that family, you were trained as a painter. If your father was a printmaker, you were trained as a printmaker. But if you were not born into an artistic family, Judith Leister was not, Maria von Osterwijk was not, you could still apprentice with a master painter if your family supported you in doing it and could afford to apprentice you, because that's something that costs money. So painters, by and large, came from the middle and the upper classes. And so we see that it's really the social status of women at this time, as much as their gender, that kind of dictates the opportunities that were available to them. The women pictured in the print on the left are dressed more typical of domestic servants, and they probably are just that. And Rochman has depicted them sewing, and she's not idealizing the situation at all. She's not trying to make it seem like it's this pleasant, domestic activity. You can see they've been at it for a long time. The candle has gone out. She's got her feet on a foot warmer. It's probably cold, and she's literally like hunched over her work, right? So there's an aspect of the physicality of this labor that's present as well. And so by including images like this, that's one way to incorporate women of the lower classes into the conversation about the artistic economy at this time. And I'm going to come back to, I'm going to come back to textiles, embroidery, and such in just a second. First, I want to talk a little bit about, again, family workshops. Again, very much a common practice to train your children in the family business, whatever that might be. In the case of the Van de Passa family, that was printmaking. So Magdalena van de Passa, this is not her. This is a portrait that she did of the Duchess of Buckingham. Magdalena van de Passa was born into a family of printmakers and was trained alongside of her brothers in the art of printmaking. That was the family business. What you see on the right is a print that she made of the Duchess of Buckingham, who she didn't know, but was a very famous personality at the time, right? And people wanted images of her. So this would have been a popular image. And on the left, we have the actual copper plate into which Magdalena van de Passa engraved. So you can see they're mirror images of each other, because when the ink was put on the copper plate and then pressed into the paper, the image comes out in reverse. So that means that she had to do this inscription backwards for it to come out legible the other way. The print is on loan from the National Gallery of Art here in Washington. The copper plate, which unbelievably still exists, because not many of them do, is on loan from the Bodleian Library in the UK. And it was really one of the more amazing moments working on this project, I think, because we came across it online and we thought, oh, that would be really nice to have. But why I really wanted it was because what's on the back of it. And so here you have an image of the back or the verso of that copper plate. The image on the left is an actual photograph of it, and then the image on the right is kind of black and white, taken in raking light, so you can see the incised lines a little bit better. And we came across this online, and I looked at it and I said, that is 100% a child's drawing. That's great. And then I started looking at it more closely and I thought, what is happening here? Like, is that a beard? Is this Santa Claus? And then I realized that the child, I mean, come on, look at the fingers. This is so clearly a child drawing, maybe like 4 or 5 years old. The child is trying to emulate the portrait on the front. So that thing that looks like the beard is actually her ruff. And I thought, this is really amazing because this speaks to this idea of a family workshop, right? Magdalena van de Passa did not have children of her own. She died quite young, but they had a large family. I'm sure there were nieces and nephews around. And at some point, somebody gave this copper plate to a child, or the child took it on their own and said, all right, your training is beginning. Like, do the best you can in terms of trying to copy the portrait on the front. So I love the immediacy of that, kind of being transported back into that family workshop environment. And also I love the fact that a child's drawing from almost 400 years ago looks exactly like a child's drawing today. Very, very identifiable. Okay, so remember I asked you to keep in mind how big that painting was in the installation view that I showed you. So here we are back to this painting. So in thinking about social class and women and opportunities that were available to them, like the two women we saw embroidering or sewing, many lower class women, they didn't have the means, even if they had the inclination or the artistic ability, to become a painter or a printmaker or whatever, they just didn't have the means financially or even socially, I would say. So I started thinking about this region and all of the lace that you see in these great 17th century portraits by Anthony van Dyck and Rembrandt van Rijn, and everyone's wearing these great lace ruffs and cuffs, and they're just dripping in lace. And I thought, who is making all that lace? And the subject of lace makers in 17th century painting is quite, we have a lot of it, but it's usually one woman sitting alone in a domestic interior making lace. And it's kind of this emblem of domestic virtue, right? Of industriousness. And that's not to say that lace wasn't made in those environments, but that kind of production was not going to support the market for this luxury product. And so what you had were institutions like the one I'm showing you here. So this is a painting by Johannes de Marais of the Maagden House, or the Maiden's House in Antwerp. And we borrowed the painting from them because it still exists. It's a museum today. And This was an institution it was a charitable institution that was founded to house and clothe and feed and educate girls from poor families. So not orphans per se, but girls from families who literally couldn't afford to keep them. And in fact, in the foreground, you can see some parents kind of bringing their daughters in. And in this huge painting, you have literally kind of a window into what was happening inside. And so what you see, and here's a detail on the right, are dozens of girls. We're talking about children, dozens of girls sitting here embroidering, like those two women we just saw in the print doing. And then there are rows of girls over here making lace. And so what you have is this kind of little epicenter of lace production in Antwerp. And if you think about lace, even today, Belgium is synonymous with lace, regions like Antwerp and Bruges and Ghent. And it was true in the 17th century as well. Flemish lace was very sought after. It was very expensive. And so there was a great demand for it. And so you have these kind of proto-industrial settings of this lace production. Now, these were skills that the girls were taught, embroidery, lace making, that kind of thing, that they could then take with them as they got older. If they were employed in service in wealthy households, right, that would kind of be on their resume, so to speak, right? They could make lace. But in the meantime, they're making all of this. All of these reams of lace and embroidery, and the institution is selling it and making quite a nice profit off of it. And so over the course of the 17th century, particularly at the Martin House, the revenue that they were getting from the lace was so great that the education of the girls kind of, let's say, became not the priority. So I think it's a really interesting example of kind of uncovering the hidden histories and the hidden labor of girls and women to make this luxury good that was so expensive, often more expensive than paintings at the time, and circulating within the same kind of luxury marketplace as paintings were. And again, just to show you an example of a piece of lace that we were lucky to borrow from the Metropolitan Museum of Art. This is a benediction veil. I've read a few different things about benediction veils. Either they were used to place directly on the altar, or maybe to cover the chalice during the Eucharist. And I wanted to show this to say that convents were also a site of a lot of lace production during this era. And I think, I'm not the lace expert, but I think, maybe some of it was sold, but a lot of it was also made for use within that particular parish or abbey or cloister or whatever you have. I have a video showing, I should have put it in here, I'm sorry I didn't. It's a very short clip playing in the galleries of the lace expert that we worked with on this project, making a very narrow strip of lace. It's probably an inch wide, and it's time lapse, so you can see her working the bobbins very quickly. And it's about, the strip that she made is like an inch wide and about 8 inches long. And it took her 11 hours to make, all told. So I really wanted to communicate the labor intensity required to create these lace objects, and also, like, that's why it was so expensive too, because it was so absolutely time consuming to make. And so when you see something like this, and this is probably about 2 feet by 2 feet, and the intricacy of it is really just astounding. Okay, how am I doing on time? Okay, all right. So networks is our third theme in the exhibition. And these are a few installation shots of the galleries. This is a theme that is addressing the different networks, both global and more local or regional, that women artists were a part of, just as their male counterparts were. And sticking with lace for just 1 second, I want to show you this piece of lace that we have on loan from a really generous private lender. And it's an example of the type of lace that would have been made in Flanders specifically for export to the Spanish colonies. So remember earlier I said that Flanders, at this time, the southern Netherlands, is under control of the Spanish Habsburg Empire. And so they have Antwerp, and other cities in those regions had direct trade connections because of the Habsburg Empire to the Spanish colonies. And so the colonists wanted to keep up with the latest fashions and have all the luxuries of home. And so lace was produced specifically for export to those colonies. And this is an example of that kind of lace. Here I am showing you two paintings. So on the right is an installation view of them, and then on the left is an enlargement of the work on the left. And these are two paintings by Johanna Verhouwen, who lived and worked in Antwerp in the 17th century. She was a spiritual daughter. This is something that I had not heard of before working on this project, and my co-curator Frederica van Dam has done a lot of work on it. So Antwerp at the time, Habsburg Empire, predominantly Catholic, so the church provided an option for many women, right? You could take vows, you could become a nun, you could be cloistered, but you could also become a spiritual daughter, which was you took vows, you didn't marry, you didn't have children. I think you even wore a particular habit, but you weren't cloistered. You weren't in a nunnery. You kind of were just living your life. You lived where you wanted to, you did what you wanted to. And we have two artists in the exhibition who are spiritual daughters. And this seems to have afforded them maybe a greater degree of autonomy that they otherwise would have had, either as full nuns or as wives. So Johanna Verhouwen was such a spiritual daughter, and she lived with her sister and her brother-in-law, and she and her sister owned a shop together in Antwerp that caters to artistic clientele. So they sold designs for tapestries, and Johanna specialized in copying paintings by famous painters of the day. Now, I won't put anybody on the spot, but this is a great kind of art history 101 lesson for identifying who these paintings are by. But I'll tell you. Okay, well, I've also told you on the slide right there, one of them. So the one on the left is after composition by Anthony van Dyck, and the one on the right is after composition by Peter Paul Rubens, arguably the two most famous painters of their day, both from the Flanders area. Now, Johanna Verhouwen made quite the career in painting these copies. Remember, there's no photography, there's no color copier handy, and so if someone wanted a copy of a painting, either they got a print of it and it wasn't colored, it was in black and white, or they commissioned somebody to make a copy of the painting. And this was, a legitimate business practice. Artists, men and women, participated in it. And Johanna Verhouwen was particularly well respected for her ability to kind of mimic the style of the artist whom she was copying. So well known for this. We borrowed these paintings from the Museo San Carlos in Mexico City. And the reason we believe that they're in Mexico City is because they were shipped there in the 17th century. So she did these paintings specifically for export, again, to the Spanish colonies. And there are records of colonists writing saying, send us more copies after Van Dyck or after Rubens. These people, again, wanted to surround themselves with the comforts of home, the embellishments of home. And this was one way to do it. Another interesting thing about these paintings is that they are painted on copper. These are very large sheets of copper. And a working hypothesis is that maybe they're on copper because if you think about the journey from Antwerp to the Spanish colonies in that day, it was a really long one and involved a lot of boat travel. And so fluctuations in temperature and humidity might have caused panel or canvas to kind of warp and bend, and maybe copper was a bit more stable. I don't know. That's the working theory. Anyway, they're in beautiful condition, and because they're on copper, they kind of glow a little bit, which is quite nice. Also in networks, talking about kind of this more global perspective of what is happening at the time. Remember, this is kind of the age of exploration. It's the height of colonization, well, the beginning of the heights of colonization. And things are coming back to the ports like Amsterdam from all over the world. The Dutch East and West India companies are, going afar and bringing things back. So the artist on the right, Cornelia de Rijk, you see two butterflies illustrated by her. We've borrowed these from the Royal Swedish Scientific Academy in Stockholm. And they're absolutely gorgeous drawings. These are insects that are found in Suriname. Suriname at the time was a Dutch colony, the north coast of South America. And specimens were being brought back. So both plant life and animal life was being brought back from these colonies. Cornelia de Rijk's husband had a vast collection of these specimens, and she illustrated them. And they're beautiful, but you can tell that she's looking at specimens because they look very specimen-like. They look like they're kind of pinned right onto the page there. Versus the illustrations that Maria Sibylla Marion did, and that's who you see on the left. And she's got a whole little vignette here of the life cycle of this moth. So you can see the caterpillar and then the cocoon and then the moth. Please don't ask me what kind of moth it is. I don't know. And this is because Maria Sibylla Marion was not content with just looking at the things that were coming in, usually dead. So she got on a boat in 1699 and took herself and her teenage daughter to Suriname with the express intent of studying the flora and the fauna over there. Now, Maria Sibylla Marion, remember back at the beginning, I showed you a volume that she had published on the metamorphosis of caterpillars. She was an artist trained by her father and her stepfather, but I would argue that her true passion was the natural world. And so even before she left her native Germany, she had published, I think, 2 volumes on the metamorphosis of caterpillars. So here's a woman who was making observations directly, right? She raised caterpillars, she looked at their transformation, and then she was able to record it as well visually because she was an artist. So she did the same thing in Suriname. Now, Suriname at the time was a Dutch colony. It was a plantation economy. So it was sugar plantations, rubber plantations, and it made copious use of enslaved labor, both enslaved Africans and enslaved indigenous populations. And we know this from numerous records, and we know this from Marion herself because these plates are taken from a dissertation that she published when she got back to Amsterdam on the flora and fauna of Suriname. And so each of these pages, each of these illustrations was accompanied by a page of text. So it's very, it's a very scientific document. She has her written observations, and then she's got the visual. And in her written description, she talks about her own use of enslaved labor in procuring a lot of these specimens, and sharing that, the enslaved people would share with her how they use certain things. The pineapple, for example, you can see it over here. I think she talks about how they prepared it, how they cooked it. And then this image here, and the reason why I drew this one out was because I think this one is particularly, oh, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but it's the peacock flower. It's known as the peacock flower. And in the description that she gives alongside of this illustration, she talks about enslaved women discussing their use of this plant. And they used it for medicinal purposes to either induce labor or to abort. And she says specifically because they did not want their children to be enslaved like they were. So it's this really kind of astounding moment of enslaved women sharing information with a European woman. We don't know their names, unfortunately, but this information is recorded by Marion and printed and published. When she gets back to Amsterdam, she prints this dissertation it's printed in Dutch and French and in Latin, which was kind of the lingua franca of the scientific community of the day. Okay, I see that we're running out of time, but we have one more section to talk about. So this section, Legacy, is a moment in the exhibition that I wanted to kind of bring people. Remember, I mentioned at the beginning, this question of like, well, if they were so famous in their day, why don't we know about them today? This is the section that tries to tease out some of that. There's a long answer and a short answer. So this is a view of the Legacy Gallery, and you see a few things here, and I'll talk about a few of them. But I wanted there to be a moment in the exhibition where I tried to bring it back to today. Like, why should we care? Like, it's all fine and good to look at these things. They're interesting histories, okay. But what does it have to do with today? Why does it matter? So here I'm attempting to make the case that projects like this, exhibitions like this, monographic exhibitions on women artists, these are all ways to kind of keep expanding the narrative, right, of art history. At this point, there hasn't been a sustained look at the contributions of women artists from this time period, really in this country in particular. And so what does it mean to have an exhibition where you're introducing 40 plus named women artists that most people haven't heard of before? Well, that's hopefully going to have a kind of a snowball effect, right? Hopefully people will come in, get interested in something, maybe young grad students, because any one of the women artists named in this exhibition, I mean, there's always more work to be done. And some of them, there's very little known. One of the images in this picture here, I'm sorry I don't have a bigger image of it. It's this really beautiful landscape. It's cows in this kind of Italianate landscape, and there's this nice sky in the background. This is by an artist, Katrina Teeling, who was really completely off the radar until a few years ago, until the work of the art historian Fred Meyer. And so this interest in historical women artists that has been, I think, more sustained than it has been in recent years is leading to more attention, new discoveries. So, people think of art history as, kind of being done, right? It's written, it's in the past, but it's constantly evolving. And I think projects like this are really important in kind of, again, kind of furthering the conversation about artists in this period. Okay, very quickly, I want to make the case of Johanna Curtin. Bloch is her married name. She was a paper cutter, incredibly famous, incredibly famous. Like, I cannot overstate how famous this woman was. Here is her portrait in the volume of Houbraken. Houbraken devotes 15 pages of text to her. He loved her, thought she was great. She was great. Peter the Great came to visit her on his tour of the Dutch Republic. Her husband, after she died, published the kind of guest book that people signed when they came to visit her studio, and it's full of like poems praising her and all the wonderful things people said about her. And even that was not enough to kind of secure her legacy. The fact that she worked in paper cutting, and this is the paper cutting here in the case, and then here's not a much better image of it. So just to say, it kind of looks like a print or a drawing, but all the black lines that you see are incised into the paper. So she would have used a straight blade. I think it's a combination of her gender, but also the material in which she worked. She kind of got sidelined from the main discussion in art history, and happily today is being kind of reincorporated, rightly so, back into the conversation of the art and artists of the time. And then quickly, just to end, again, the focus on historical women artists is good to see, and it does lead to real change in museums. The work by Judith Leister that I'm showing you on the left has recently been acquired by the Currier Museum of Art in New Hampshire. And, this is a painting that was actually deaccessioned by another museum in the 1970s. So it's really interesting to see that within not quite 50 years, Judith Leister has gone from, having her paintings deaccessioned by one museum and then actively sought after and collected by another museum today. And then I'm including the fabulous painting by Rocco Rausch that is in our own collection, that was part of our founder's collection that she and her husband gifted to the museum when we opened in 1987. And we have her to thank for kind of the abundance of art that we have from this period, because she was collecting these things in the 70s and the 80s when a lot of people weren't particularly museums. And so we are so fortunate for her foresight in collecting, that we're able to share them with everybody today. So I'm going to leave it there. I know it's just a little after 7. I'm sorry that I went over. I'm going to stop sharing. And Gabby, I think we can, if people are apt to stick around, we can do some questions.
Yes, happy to. We do have a few questions in the chat and in the Q&A feature. So again, if you have to log off early, thank you so much for coming. But if you can stick around for a few more minutes, we're going to try to get through as many questions as we can before we let you all go. All right. So first of all, thank you, Jenny. That was so informative. And I always love listening to you and our other curators speak about our exhibitions and our collection. I learned so much, and it's just incredible. And many people in the chat are saying very similar things. But our first question that I have for you is, were Dutch women artists better known in their time than women artists in other countries?
That's a hard qualification to make, because I don't have the depth of knowledge about other countries in this time period. What I do know is no, not necessarily. I think thinking of Artemisia Gentileschi or Luisa Roldan in Spain, I think, women artists in other areas of Europe at this time were also known and respected for their work.
Thank you. And then this next question, I think you've touched on a little bit while you were speaking, but the question is, were women allowed to paint nudes from live models? And I know you mentioned plaster models, so if you could expand on that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and I still have lots of questions about it. There are nudes in the exhibition, drawings by some women artists. There's, of course, that crucified Christ. I mean, he's not fully nude, but his torso is amazing. So I think, it depended. I think I hate to be vague like that, but I think it really depended. I think it was definitely not the norm. I think a lot of women artists were looking at sculptures and prints for nudes because remember, drawing is the foundation of artistic practice at this time, and the human form was thought to be, that's like the highest ideal, right? And so if you can accurately depict the human form, then you can do these great religious scenes or mythological scenes or what have you. And so by not, especially, when the academies are formed, right, and women are actively barred from studying the nude, the playing field, if you will, is very uneven because then it's effectively keeping them from accessing those higher genres of art. I haven't read any evidence for this time period of any woman looking, studying from an actual nude. Did maybe it happen? I don't know. I don't know. We just, yeah.
The documentation hasn't made itself known yet. And then the next question is something you also touched on a bit during your presentation, but if you can expand a bit more on it is, did women need to be very wealthy to pursue art? Who sponsored them? And this person also mentioned the artist Angelica Kaufman as an example. And I know you mentioned that many of the artists, both male and female, their parents or their father was an artist. So want to talk on that?
Yeah. So, if a woman was not born into an artistic family that, where she could receive training, if it was allowed, and it's not to say that all male painters trained their girls in the art of painting, but if they did, they could receive training that way. But if not, then they had to apprentice with an outside, i.e., non-related male. And what we see in this exhibition is that there are a number of examples of women who were able to do that. Judith Leister, Maria van Oosterwijk, Rachel Rausch. And yes, I think particularly Maria van Oosterwijk and Rachel Rausch were from wealthy families. Leister's family, her father was a brewer and I think a textile trader, maybe not particularly successful because I think his brewery went bankrupt. But we know that she must have trained with a master painter because her skills are so great. It might have been Frans Hals because their styles are very similar. And so to apprentice a student to a master painter, that costs money. And so, yes, by and large, painters in particular were from the middle and the upper classes.
And then this is, I'm going to say the question, partially answer it, and then pose it back to you. It's about the lace making video. It's currently not available online, but is that something we could explore in the future about putting it online?
We could certainly ask Elena, but I would direct people to, let me put her name in the chat maybe. who we worked with because she is the expert and she made the video and it's probably on her Instagram feed. So her name is Elena Kanegi Lux.
Thank you. Right. And then the next question is about the spiritual daughters. Were they the same as the Beguine who lived in lay communities?
No, good question.
Mhm.
So the Beguines were kind of like the inverse of the spiritual sisters. So I don't think they necessarily took vows, but they lived in community. So they lived together, kind of like a commune. Whereas the spiritual sisters took vows, wore habits, but didn't live in community. That's my understanding. I don't know.
Say, no, that's so it's very interesting because that it came up in the chat because I was recently reading a memoir and they came up and I was like, oh, that's like I know these people.
Spiritual daughters came up in the memoir.
No, the Beguine.
Oh,
Oh
okay.
yeah. So it's like, oh, I'm familiar. Okay. I'm gonna try to get two or three more questions in before we wrap things up. And so the next one is, did Maria Sibylla Marion keep journals during her travels abroad? And you might have mentioned this. And then were they published or translated into English?
Um, I don't, gosh, that's a good question. So she made watercolors of all of the illustrations from her dissertation, and those are now, I believe, in the Royal Collection in the UK. And then those were the images from which the prints were then made. And then she and her daughters would hand color the prints. As for journals, I don't know that there's any kind of manuscript. Everything from her that I'm familiar with was published.
Great, thank you. And then we'll do one last question. And it's about the Maria van Osservik's 1968 Benita's still life on three different occasions. This member shared that she cannot figure out what the wooden object in the front of the table is.
Oh my
Do
gosh, I
you
have this
know,
every
Jenny?
time. No, every time I look at that painting, I'm like, what is that? And I keep meaning to look into it. I should have asked the courier when he was here, but I don't know.
All
I'm
good.
sure somebody
Uh,
does, but I don't know.
Amazing. And then can you once again one more time the name of the lace maker? So I don't think it went through in the
Yeah.
chat.
Oh, sure. Okay. Sorry. Hold on. Let me get to the chat. So it's Elena, Elena Kanagi, Kanagy, Lux, Lux.
Perfect. Awesome.
Oh,
Thank you so
maybe,
much.
yeah, maybe people can't see it because it says me to hosts and panelists.
Oh, okay.
Hold on. Let me
Oh,
change it. Everyone. Hold on. And she was actually just here this weekend doing a lace workshop with us. There.
all right. Went through. Perfect.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. And thank you all, everyone. Just a few bits of housekeeping before we wrap up. So you all are the first to hear about this. We are hosting two member tours of Antwerp to Amsterdam on Saturday, December 13th at 11 a.m. and Saturday, January 10th at 1 p.m. These tours will be docent led, but it will be a fun time for you all to experience this amazing exhibition. So if you are in town those dates, as soon as they're on the website, definitely sign up. We think this is going to be a really popular tours for our members and guests. And then coming up on December 8th, we'll have Member Shopping Day. It'll be both in person and then also available online. From 5 p.m. to 7 p.m., you can join us in the shop for 20% off in-store purchases, and we'll have some light refreshments for everyone. But if you're not able to make it in person that day or you don't live nearby, you can still get the 20% discount from December 8th through Sunday, December 14th. We'll be sending out more information about that, so be on the lookout. And then opening next month is Ruth Orkin Women on the Move. That opens December 12th, 2025, and then it's on view through March. Be on the lookout for potential programming in the new year. And then also in the new year, on Wednesday, January 28th, Jenny's going to be back with our other curator, Hannah Shambroom, and they'll be presenting on Tawny Chapman. And invitations for this program will be sent in early January, but the program is already on the website if you'd like to sign up. And here's a few upcoming programs we have going on. This month, next month, and our next virtual program is it's going to be a public program, Art Chat, on January 9th at 5 p.m. And then as a reminder, our recordings from our previous virtual programs and eventually this one, and all of our Fresh Talks, Creatives Keynotes, and other public programs are available on YouTube. So thank you again for joining us. We're so thrilled that you took the time out to see Jenny, this presentation, which was amazing. And then also thank you again for your support. We're so grateful for what you do for Nemois. Allows us to be privately funded museum and open during some uncertain times and welcome in so many people who rely on the work we do. So again, thank you. And I hope you all have a great evening.
Thank you. Thank you, Gabby.